remind you that the masters of communism are dedicated to our destruction, nor is there any need to remind you that they have at their disposal a truly formidable power. But perhaps we can all profit from being reminded that this power is a two-faced coin. One side is the strictly national power of the USSR, its satellites, and Red China. This includes the social, military, economic, and political aspects of national power. The other side of the coin, and the one with which this talk is exclusively concerned, is what is often called international communism. I prefer to call it Soviet communism, because this emphasizes the all-important fact that it is controlled by the bosses of the Kremlin. We face today a new situation in international relations and a new kind of international power. Today we find some Frenchmen who act not like Frenchmen, but like Soviet citizens. Some Italians who act not like Romans, but like Muscovites. Some Americans who act like a Hiss or the Rosenbergs. Why do these free men and women choose communism? What is it that communism offers or appears to offer that will lead men and women to sell their freedom in order to have it? Because freedom is the price they pay. Why is it that intelligent men and women have been attracted into this movement? These are very difficult questions. All that I can do is to set forth some of the suggested answers which so far have stood the tests we could apply to them. We're told that we are engaged against the communists in a struggle for the minds of men. To a degree, and loosely speaking, this is certainly true. But to the masses of the people throughout the world, the primary appeals of communism are not primarily rational or intellectual, but emotional. The common assumption that communism is an intellectual system or a philosophy which appeals primarily to the mind is not quite correct. The movement does have some intellectual appeals, but in my judgment, the primary appeals are emotional, not rational or intellectual. The main appeal is to the emotions and not to the mind. Communist spokesmen always picture the USSR as the paradise of workers. We know that this is a cynically fraudulent picture, but there are millions of people throughout the world who do not know it and do not wish to know it. The picture is a gross deceit, but it is one of the communists' most successful ways of attracting people toward themselves. Propaganda repetition of the themes of humanitarianism, idealism, and an attainable earthly paradise explain in part why communism seems to some people to offer the answers to certain basic human hungers. What are these hungers? What is it that communism does or pretends to do to answer these hungers and to fill them? I'm going to concentrate on only 4 of these basic hungers. The hunger to belong, the hunger for recognition and status, the hunger for leadership, and the hunger to be led. The hunger to belong, that is to identify oneself with something greater, something stronger, something less mortal than mere man, is apparently common to all of us. There are very few of us who escape this urge at some time or another. Sooner or later, most of us, even those who pride ourselves on being extremely self-sufficient, get to the point where we want to be identified with some cause or some group or some purpose, because without such identification, our lives suddenly seem to be meaningless. We realize, in other words, a need for a faith by which to live, a faith in something beyond and above ourselves, something bigger than we are, something less mortal. The more tense and the more confused the circumstances in which we live, whether they are the circumstances of our personal lives or of society in general, the more insistent is this hunger to belong. But most men are so trained and conditioned that they are not willing to attach themselves to or identify themselves with just any cause or any group or any movement. Most men prefer good to evil. Most men prefer to identify themselves with a group or a cause in which they can have confidence that it is a good cause. The communists always are at pains to present their movement in these terms. The communists always say that communism fights against misery, that it opposes the exploitation of man by man, that it is against poverty and against inequalities and injustices, that it stands, in short, against evil. And simultaneously, the communists also say that communism fights for justice, for equality, for peace. In other words, for good. The communists say, join with us in working for the greatest good of all mankind. The fact that communism in practice pretty nearly reverses these promises, bringing injustice and inequality and misery to its subjects, doesn't seem to make the promise any less appealing to the uninformed or the unwary or the willfully blind. Communism not only presents itself as a good, but it presents all other systems as evil. The person thus addressed is therefore presented with a choice, or an apparent choice, between a positive good and a positive evil. I can illustrate this with the case of a British scientist. This man was very sensitive, a genuinely sincere, humane person. Those who recruited him into the service of communism first convinced him that nationalism was the root of evil, and particularly was the root of war and suffering. Then they convinced him that internationalism was good and was the hope for peace and decency and justice. The third step was to convince him that the only real champion of internationalism was the USSR. They made him believe that in siding with the USSR, he was siding with the angels against the evil of nationalism. Accepting the communist code means giving up all former codes of ethics and behavior. That sort of surrender is one of the things which makes subsequent defection very, very difficult. Whether communists really believe that they are working for the greater good of mankind, or whether these promises are the most cruel kind of deception, is beside the point. The point is that men can and do convince themselves that in joining the Communist Party, they are joining a good cause. It is a cause which not only allows a man to lose himself in it, it positively demands that he lose himself in it. Lenin once said that he wanted in his party not part-time revolutionaries, not those who could devote only their spare afternoons and evenings after work, but only those who could give to it the whole of their lives. The party member has no life, no being of his own outside of the party. Communism, in a very literal sense, offers a home to the homeless, an asylum to the bewildered, a refuge to the lonely or the rejected. A second hunger, common to man, is the hunger for recognition. It is very closely allied to the hunger to belong. In fact, I am not sure that you can always distinguish between them. A sense of belonging may satisfy the hunger for recognition. However, hunger for recognition usually means something more. It means catering to the personal vanity. It means satisfying the ego. It means, in the psychologist's words, achieving status. The best illustration and description I have ever seen of what this meant was made by Mrs. Hedda Massing. She was at one time the wife of the communist leader Gerhard Eisler. She was also the communist agent who competed with Alger Hiss in an effort to enlist Noel Field into the party apparatus. This is Mrs. Massing's explanation and description of how she felt when she and her comrades were newly in the party.
That I was important to the revolution to come, I was convinced. Each one of us was important in this new world. Each one of us would have a great and all-essential task to perform. No matter what our role, however small, we dramatized it. Though I understood little of the theories of Marx and Lenin, I was convinced that I was playing a tremendous role in history. Not that we spoke of it in such terms. Nevertheless, it was a deep feeling which each one of us had. This lifted us above ordinary life, made us seem to ourselves better than the men or women who did not belong to this great movement. There was no problem for which we did not have an immediate answer. We were the elect, and we lived like the elect. We were always busy recruiting converts. If they resisted us, they were our enemies. If it took them some time to reach our point of view, we treated them patronizingly. We knew everything about everything.
It requires no imagination to see how this catering to personal vanity appeals to persons who feels that society has failed to recognize their talents and abilities. Not all party members fall into this category, of course, but it is a matter of record that many party members and ex-members were attracted into the movement precisely by what psychologists call this satisfaction of ego. The third of the hungers with which we are concerned is the hunger for leadership. This is twofold. It may be a desire to be led, or conversely, a desire to be a leader. It's pretty easy to see how a person who feels himself scorned or rejected by society may hanker not only for recognition, but also for a chance to control other people. Such control becomes a tangible proof of his worth. It enables him also to strike back at those whom he thinks have injured him. Taken together, this is part of the complex hunger for power with which I am not going to deal. Just as real, though perhaps less generally understood, is the desire to be led. Some people always want to be led. Most of us have this desire, more or less briefly, at some time or another. In times of personal or social crisis and tension, in times when changes come so thick and fast that the individual can no longer place himself in his group, when he knows that something is wrong but doesn't know what, when he feels himself a pawn, in times like these, most men become highly suggestible. They listen eagerly for any voice which sounds authoritative. They listen eagerly for anyone who can tell them what is wrong and what to do to right it, who can diagnose their trouble and prescribe a cure. The diagnoses and prescriptions must and do share certain characteristics in common. First, they have to be simple, overly simple, in fact, because they have to be readily understandable by a wide variety of people. Secondly, they must pose, or at least appear to pose, a freedom of choice. This is very important. Most, at least, appear to place a very high value upon the freedom of choice, real or pretended. What kinds of choice? I've already suggested one, the choice between good and evil. Others are the choice between war and peace, between certainty and uncertainty, between orderliness and chaos, between a simple diagnosis and a complex, hard-to-understand diagnosis, between a quick, easy cure, that is, a panacea, and a long, difficult course of treatment. A choice between a world which you must accept as it is and a world which you can help to change. That choice must appear to be genuine, and the goal must seem to be attainable. Otherwise, there is no appeal. Suppose you offer an Italian peasant a new plow. This is something which is within the possibility of reason as he sees it. He can get it. You offer him a new tractor. This is not attainable. This has no real appeal. So these things must be simple, and they must appear to offer a real choice, meaning a choice that can be achieved. There are many examples of successful use of these simple diagnoses and prescriptions. Mussolini, when he made his first bid for power, told his poverty-stricken and violence-ridden Italians, "Your woes are due to Bolshevism. Join our fascisti. Drive out the Bolsheviks and your troubles will be over." Hitler told the German middle classes, "Your hardships, the problems, the troubles which inflation has brought you, the unemployment that hurts you, all these things are due to the Jews. Join us in ridding Germany of these parasites, and we will all prosper and be powerful." And Lenin, smarter than either of the other two, compressed a diagnosis and a prescription into one short slogan: peace, bread, and land. And what he was saying in the shorthand of that slogan was, lack of these things is what is causing your trouble. We will give them to you and all will be well. In each of those historical cases, a very great many converts were won. Let's take a hypothetical case. Hypothetical only in the sense that I have brought together a fairly large number of individual cases and lumped them into a common denominator. Let's suppose that we have a little Italian tradesman who watched the war and the occupations and their aftermath wreck his business, ruin his home, scatter and destroy his family. Calamity after calamity has fallen upon him. He has lost his place. He has lost his position. He has lost his material well-being. He has lost his status. He asks, just as you or I might ask under the circumstances, why do these troubles come upon me? What have I done to deserve such punishment? The rational and honest answer would say that there were a great many causes, including some for which the little Italian himself was partially responsible. This may be an accurate appraisal, but it is not a comforting one. Nobody likes to be told that he got himself into the mess, and the communists recognize this and exploit it. So they say to this ruined and disconsolate little tradesman, it wasn't your fault. It wasn't anything you did or failed to do. You couldn't help it. You were a victim of capitalism. As long as capitalism exists, there are going to be aggressive wars. As long as there are wars, fine, innocent people like you are going to get badly hurt. Why don't you join us and help speed the collapse of capitalism? By doing this, you will not only be helping yourself, you will also be helping others at the same time. Moreover, we communists are going to win this coming struggle, and a wise man will not lose a chance to be on the side of the victor. Those communist answers are neat, orderly, highly attractive to the tradesman, because they shift all the blame to the others, provide a scapegoat, and also suggest an attainable and highly desirable goal, that is, a time of peace and plenty. At the same time, they give him an invitation to become part of a successful, good cause. In short, these answers marry idealism with selfishness, which is characteristic of communism. The recognition and exploitation of these and other basic human hungers are not the only means the communists employ to enlist people on their side. Neither is the trick of supplying answers for the unwary or the bewildered, nor the promises of earthly paradise for the hopeful. Pie in the sky, which is what the old labor leaders used to call that sort of promise, isn't enough. There must be more than dreams, and there is. There is an immediate material appeal. Pie in the sky is made real by pie in today's lunch pail. This hypothetical Italian tradesman would have been given a job through party auspices, or if he had a job, he would have been given a promotion, and he would have been given some tangible recognition, either in connection with the job or within the framework of the party. He would have been made to feel, as Hedda Massing said, one of the elect. This material appeal may be the positive conferring of immediate tangible benefits, or it may be the negative appeal of blackmail. This little Italian, for example, might have been suspected of being a collaborationist. The party, in that case, would promise to help him to conceal the fact. The blackmail appeal often goes like this: if you join us, we will help you to conceal your past record, which would bar you from employment. But if you refuse to join us, or having once joined, if you attempt to desert us, then we will expose your record. Of course, there are many possible variations on that, but the point is not the detail of the specific device, but the fact that the party constantly uses a combination of material and intangible lures to win and to hold converts. Don't think for a minute that the American Communist Party has not and still does not practice this dual technique. Job opportunities, promotions, advancements in pay and in rank have been arranged by the party members for their comrades and for those whom they wish to enlist as comrades. Blackmail, threats of exposure have also been employed. Perhaps there is a little less of that today than there was some years ago, because the party has less opportunity than it once had. But such things still go on in some professions and occupations. I remarked earlier that communism had certain intellectual appeals, and that the communists used them. The communist system of thought appears both reasonable and logical, so long as one neither challenges its basic premises nor presses too hard for proof of its assertion. If you accept the basic premise that the communists have exclusive possession of a magical formula, which they call the science of Marxism-Leninism, and that it is the law of social development, if you accept as an axiom the unproven and unprovable assertion that capitalism is incurably and fatally ill, then all the rest of their system, with very few exceptions, follows along with a beautifully precise logic. But if you challenge those premises or demand proof of the assertions, the whole thing falls logically to the ground because the premises are unsound and the proof is lacking. The superficial and the uncritical do not, of course, question the premises nor challenge the assertions. So to them, the formula appears neat and precise. Notice that I said the superficial and the uncritical. I did not say the ignorant or the stupid. To the superficial, to the unwary, to the naive, the system looks and sounds like a scientific formula, which of course is exactly what it pretends to be. If you believe the communists' claim that their formula enables those who grasp it to correctly understand the present, to interpret the past, and accurately to anticipate the future, then you are not likely to be blind to the promise of power, which is implicit in that. If you can comprehend and foresee the future course of events, think what an advantage you have over all other men. The rest of us can see the future only darkly, as through a glass. You will be our master, because you alone will know how to meet the present and how to prepare for the future. That promise of power, partly intellectual, but mostly emotional, appeals very strongly to certain types. Much in the same way, the orderliness which this scientific formula pretends to guarantee appeals to other types. Communism is a system that appeals to those who want authoritative answers, and there are persons like that in every society. This is akin to the hunger for leadership, but it has certain intellectual overtones. There are other intellectual appeals. But to repeat my basic premise, the main appeals of communism are, in the first instance, emotional rather than intellectual. I would go so far as to say that a thinking man can accept communism intellectually only if he first drugs himself emotionally. And the communists are at great pains to see that the proper emotional drugs are applied in each important case. To the idealist, to the man or woman who is sincerely troubled by social inequalities and abuses, the communists present themselves as fellow idealists, fellow humanitarians, fellow social reformers. If the prospect is of a religious turn of mind, the communists present communism as applied or practical religion, concealing, of course, the fundamental and irreconcilable hostility between communism and all other religious faiths. If the prospect is devoted to democracy, the communists, again with a cynical and characteristic disregard for truth, will stress their claim to be agents of democracy. You may remember when the American Communist Party presented itself as 20th century Americanism, or the party of Lincoln and Jefferson. But the party doesn't talk idealism to persons who are angry at society for not giving them their due. It doesn't talk idealism or religion to people who are rebellious against authority and discipline. The party encourages these people in their angers and in their rebellions, gradually getting across to them the idea that individual action is useless and that the person must join the collective action of the party if he is to be effective. This is the so-called agitational approach. It says, in effect, join the one group which is really and effectively doing something to correct the evils you know about. For the inquiring type, for those groping for something which will explain life, which will provide a reason and a purpose for living, the party stresses its social philosophy. As Massing and as millions of others have discovered, the party professes to have all the answers. Those who hunger for leadership, for someone to follow, are attracted and held. Those who feel lonely or lost or rejected are offered the support of a group. They are given a sense of belonging. That the group is conspiratorial and at least a quasi-secret society probably adds an extra touch of attractiveness for people whose ordinary lives are dull and drab routines. In these and in other ways, the communists seek to harness human needs and human hungers to the service of the party. They cater to the individual until they have him thoroughly hooked. What this means, what it is to be hooked, was most clearly explained by old Nikolai Bukharin. Bukharin, intimate of Lenin and Stalin, was one of the party's great theoreticians. He was a brilliant man, perhaps the most brilliant they ever had. But he got into trouble within the party itself, was tried, sentenced to death, and eventually killed in the great purges. In the final stages of the purge trials came the very dramatic incidents of the so-called last pleas of the accused. Some of them, like the former chief of police, Yagoda, groveled and begged for mercy, not old Bukharin. When it came time for the last plea, Bukharin said something like this: "Some of you know that for 3 months I would say nothing, answer no questions. Then suddenly I came into this court and I confessed everything with which the comrade procurator chose to charge me. Why this change? I think you deserve to know. While I was in prison, I made a re-examination of my entire past. For when you ask yourself, if I must die, for what am I dying? An absolutely black vacuity arises before you with startling vividness if you die unrepented, that is, outside the party. But if you say to yourself, suppose by some miracle I should not die, suppose my life should be spared, again, what for? Why live isolated from everyone, an enemy of the people, in an inhuman position, completely cut off from the essence of life? Gentlemen, it is sobering and somewhat frightening to ponder the nature of an enemy who can evoke such devotion from a man whom it is about to devour.